On September 7, 1939, just a week into the invasion of Poland, the devastating effects of the German blitzkrieg became increasingly apparent. The rapid and coordinated assault on Poland by the Wehrmacht showed no signs of slowing down, leaving the Polish forces and government in a state of crisis. As the situation in Poland deteriorated, the United Kingdom and France, now formally at war with Germany, faced mounting pressure to take more decisive action. Meanwhile, the international community watched with growing concern as the conflict threatened to expand further. This day was characterized by significant military developments, political maneuvering, and shifting public perceptions, all of which underscored the complexity and uncertainty of the early days of World War II. The German advance. Blitzkrieg in full force. By September 7th, the German military campaign in Poland was advancing with brutal efficiency. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg tactics, combining fast-moving infantry, mechanized units, and air power, continued to overwhelm Polish defenses. The German forces were pressing toward Warsaw, aiming to encircle and cut off the capital from the rest of the country. Key cities and towns were falling one by one under the relentless assault, with German troops capturing Piotrkow Trybunalski, a strategic location that further opened the route to Warsaw. The rapid German advance created widespread confusion and disarray among Polish military units. Communications were severely disrupted, and Polish forces found themselves increasingly isolated, unable to coordinate effectively. Despite orders from the Polish High Command to regroup and mount counterattacks, many units were either too scattered or too encircled to execute coordinated maneuvers. The Polish army's lack of modern equipment and preparation for the fast-paced nature of blitzkrieg left it at a significant disadvantage. In addition to the ground assault, the Luftwaffe continued its relentless bombing campaign, targeting not only military positions but also civilian infrastructure and population centers. The bombardment of Warsaw intensified on September 7th, with significant destruction reported across the city. The psychological impact of the bombings was immense, causing panic and further disrupting Polish efforts to organize a coherent defense. German propaganda, orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda, continued to frame the invasion as a defensive action necessitated by Polish aggression. German media outlets lauded the Wehrmacht's swift victories and portrayed the campaign as a righteous endeavor to secure Germany's eastern borders and protect ethnic Germans in Poland. This narrative aimed to solidify domestic support and present a unified front as the nation moved deeper into war. Poland's continued resistance. A nation in desperation. For Poland, September 7th represented another day of intense struggle and growing desperation. The Polish government and military command, led by Marshal Edward Rydz Śmigły, were increasingly aware that their situation was becoming untenable. Despite the mounting losses and strategic setbacks, Polish forces continued to resist wherever possible. The defense of Warsaw was a focal point, as the city braced for an imminent siege. The Polish military and civilian population worked together to erect barricades and fortify positions in preparation for the expected German assault. In the north, Polish forces were attempting to hold the line near Modlin Fortress, a crucial defensive position just north of Warsaw. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the defenders managed to hold their ground temporarily, inflicting some losses on the advancing German units. However, these efforts were largely symbolic in the face of the overwhelming German military machine. The Polish Air Force, significantly depleted by earlier battles, continued to operate in a limited capacity, conducting sporadic sorties against German columns and attempting to protect key areas from Luftwaffe attacks. The Polish government made repeated pleas for assistance from the United Kingdom and France, but the responses were cautious and measured. The hope that the Allies would launch a significant offensive to divert German forces away from Poland was fading. With each passing day, the reality set in that Poland was increasingly fighting alone against the might of Nazi Germany. The Allied dilemma, strategy and mobilization. As the situation in Poland became more dire, the United Kingdom and France faced growing pressure to take more decisive action against Germany. However, the strategic and logistical challenges of launching an immediate offensive were significant. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and his war cabinet were keenly aware of the need to support Poland, but there was also a recognition of the practical limitations. The British military was still mobilizing, and while the Royal Navy had already implemented a blockade against Germany, more extensive military operations were still being planned and organized. The British Expeditionary Force (BEF) was in the process of deploying to France, but this was a gradual process, requiring time to complete. The Royal Air Force (RAF) continued its reconnaissance and defensive missions, but there was hesitancy to engage in large-scale bombing campaigns over Germany due to concerns about civilian casualties and the overall strategic impact. Chamberlain faced increasing criticism from some quarters, both within his government and from the public, who demanded more robust action to relieve pressure on Poland and to demonstrate Britain's commitment to fighting Nazi aggression. The British press was divided, with some newspapers advocating for immediate military action while others called for a more measured approach, recognizing the risks of rushing into a full-scale confrontation without adequate preparation. In France, Prime Minister Édouard Daladier's government faced similar strategic dilemmas. The French army, heavily influenced by its experience in World War I, remained largely defensive in its posture, focused on fortifying the Maginot Line and preparing for a potential German offensive. While there were calls for a more aggressive strategy to support Poland directly, the prevailing mood in the French High Command was one of caution. The limited incursion into the Saarland region on September 7th was a symbolic gesture rather than a meaningful military action, reflecting the hesitancy to engage in a larger conflict at this early stage. French public opinion was increasingly anxious as the news from Poland grew more grim. The memory of the heavy losses suffered in World War I was still fresh in the minds of many, and there was a palpable fear of being drawn into another prolonged and bloody conflict. However, there was also a recognition that failing to act decisively against Germany could have far-reaching consequences for France's security and its position in Europe. International reactions, reassessments, and strategic calculations. The rapid German advance in Poland and the mounting humanitarian crisis provoked a wide range of reactions from the international community. On September 7th, governments and leaders around the world continued to grapple with the implications of the conflict and how best to respond. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt maintained his stance of neutrality, while carefully monitoring the situation in Europe. The Roosevelt administration was increasingly aware of the potential impact of a German victory in Poland and the broader threat posed by Nazi expansionism. While the American public remained strongly isolationist, there were growing discussions within the government about the possibility of providing indirect support to the Allies, such as through economic aid or the sale of military supplies. However, any move towards more active engagement was still politically sensitive and subject to significant debate. In the Soviet Union, the leadership under Joseph Stalin continued to watch events closely. The Soviet Union's position was complicated by the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which had outlined spheres of influence in Eastern Europe, including the division of Poland. As German forces advanced deeper into Polish territory, the Soviet Union began preparing to assert its own interests in accordance with the pact. Soviet military forces were placed on alert along the border with Poland, ready to move when the timing was deemed appropriate. Official Soviet propaganda continued to present the conflict as a capitalist war, with little mention of the secret agreements with Germany. In Italy, Benito Mussolini continued his diplomatic maneuvers, proposing once again to mediate peace between the warring parties. On September 7th, Mussolini renewed his call for an international conference to negotiate an end to hostilities, positioning Italy as a potential broker of peace. However, this offer was largely seen by the Western Allies as a ploy to buy time for the Axis powers and was dismissed accordingly. Other neutral countries, such as Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands, continued to bolster their defenses and prepare for the possibility of being drawn into the conflict. These nations, acutely aware of their strategic positions in Europe, sought to maintain their neutrality while preparing for potential threats from both Germany and the Allied powers. The situation was particularly tense in Belgium and the Netherlands, where fears of German invasion prompted increased military readiness and diplomatic efforts to secure guarantees of neutrality. Media coverage and public opinion. The global media landscape on September 7th continued to shape public perception and understanding of the unfolding war. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and newsreels offered updates on the military situation in Poland and the broader strategic developments, influencing how different populations viewed the conflict. In the United Kingdom, the BBC and major newspapers like The Times and The Guardian reported on the grim developments in Poland and the continued mobilization of British forces. Coverage emphasized the need for national unity and readiness for a prolonged conflict, even as questions remained about the best strategy for supporting Poland and countering German aggression. Editorials and opinion pieces reflected a growing resolve to confront the Nazi threat, coupled with a recognition of the challenges and sacrifices that lay ahead. In France, the press continued to cover the limited military actions in the Saarland and the broader mobilization efforts. Newspapers like Le Figaro and Le Monde highlighted the urgent need for a coherent strategy to support Poland and counter the German advance. Public opinion was increasingly divided, with some advocating for more aggressive action and others urging caution, mindful of the potential costs of a full-scale war. In Germany, state-controlled media maintained a tight grip on the narrative, emphasizing the successes of the Wehrmacht in Poland and the righteousness of Germany's actions. Propaganda outlets like Völkischer Beobachter and Der Angriff continued to portray the war as a defensive struggle against foreign aggression, aimed at protecting German interests and securing the nation's future. The propaganda efforts were designed to maintain public morale and support for the war effort, even as the realities of a prolonged conflict began to take shape. In the United States, newspapers such as The New York Times and The Washington Post provided extensive coverage of the events in Europe, with detailed analyses of military movements and diplomatic developments. The American press remained largely neutral but began to explore the potential implications of the conflict for U.S. foreign policy and global stability. Opinion pieces debated the merits of isolationism versus engagement, reflecting the ongoing debate within American society about the nation's role in the world. Strategic implications and the road ahead. The events of September 7, 1939, highlighted the rapid escalation of the conflict and the strategic dilemmas faced by all parties involved. For Poland, the day marked another step toward inevitable defeat, as German forces continued to advance and encircle key cities. The Polish government's appeals for more substantial Allied support reflected a growing sense of desperation and frustration, as the promised assistance seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive in time to make a meaningful difference. For the United Kingdom and France, the day underscored the complexities of coalition warfare and the challenges of transitioning from peace to war. Both nations were still adjusting to the realities of a conflict that they had hoped to avoid and were grappling with the strategic uncertainties of how best to respond to German aggression. The debates over offensive versus defensive strategies, and the extent to which they could and should support Poland directly, reflected broader tensions within the Allied leadership that would continue to shape the early phases of the war. Internationally, the events of September 7th prompted further reassessments and strategic recalibrations. The United States maintained its official stance of neutrality but was increasingly aware of the potential global implications of the conflict. The Soviet Union, Italy, and other nations watched closely, each calculating how best to navigate the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape to their advantage. Conclusion: a war deepening and a world in flux. September 7, 1939, was a day of intensifying conflict and growing uncertainty, as the rapid German advance in Poland and the hesitant Allied response highlighted the complexities of the early days of World War II. The unfolding events revealed the challenges of coalition warfare, the limits of pre-war planning and preparation, and the unpredictable nature of a conflict that was beginning to engulf much of Europe and threaten global stability. For the nations involved, it was a time of critical decisions and strategic positioning, as they sought to navigate a war that was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. For the people of the world, it was a time of fear, hope, and resilience, as they faced the prospect of another devastating conflict and the challenges that lay ahead. The events of September 7th set the stage for a war that would reshape the political, social, and economic landscape of the 20th century, leaving an indelible mark on history.